All right, hello everybody. Welcome into our Pella Windows Postgame Show. My name is Brandon Adams. We're live here at the UGA bookstore, and this is not a conversation I expect to be having today, but Georgia played, without question, the worst game of the Kirby Smart era, and you probably have to reach several years back into the past to find one where they've looked really worse than they did today. Just a absolutely anemic offensive showing, baffling play calling, seemingly aiding to those problems, and Georgia does what it should have done when it played the way that it did today. It got beaten and embarrassed by South Carolina. No doubt you have plenty you want to say about this. We'll give you a chance to do that. Game just ending, folks filing out of here. It's going to take me a little bit of time to get enough of a signal to pull up your comments. Looks like YouTube's kind of coming up here first. And a lot of this is just going to be me reacting to whatever y'all want to talk about. I mean, this is a day where you really can't say much more than what we're saying right now. Just a awful day for Georgia all the way around, and a loss that admittedly I didn't see coming. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of non-Georgia fans out there that say UGA fans are too overconfident, thought their team was good again when it wasn't, or something along those lines. And I'm not so sure that kind of criticism does hit a little close to home on a day like this when Georgia just goes out there. And not only does it not look like the number 3 team in the country, it doesn't look a team that was even as good as South Carolina, who took it to Georgia from a physicality standpoint on both sides of the ball all day long. Took it to Georgia. Certainly Will Muschamp seemingly had a very good game plan in mind. This was as bad as it gets for Georgia. The first home loss this team has suffered since the end of the season in 2016. First SEC East loss it's taken since also the near the end of the 2016 season. Georgia had been working on quite a streak of impressive performances, winning all of its division games by at least 2 touchdowns since the end of the 2016 season. But that is not the case here today, and we're going to talk to you about it. I've got just zero internet right now, y'all. I apologize. We're going to get these up and running, and hopefully you can hear me okay. I don't have you at all. I don't have comments at all here, but we'll get it going. I guess while I'm waiting for this to fix itself and get a little bit better, let me just kind of say it this way. Whatever was wrong with Georgia today, recruiting's not going to fix. And, we have said this over and over again about, boy, you look at Georgia stacking these classes one right after the other, and there has been no one more guilty than me of telling all of you that as long as Georgia keeps stacking this talent the way that it is, number 3 class in 2017, number 1 class in 2018, number 2 class in 2019, as long as all of this continues, there is no one who's told you more than often than I am that championships are going to follow and big wins are going to follow, that there's no greater correlation in college football between recruiting and on-field success. Well, Georgia has out-recruited South Carolina by about this much, if not even more. And so whatever was broken out there today, another top 3 recruiting class is just not going to fix. So I don't know what you do about that. I don't know what you say about that necessarily, but we will certainly deal with it today and see if we can figure out where you go after this shocker. I can't get comments on my Facebook, on my phone, on my laptop, or anything else. So apparently my technology is going to work about as well as the Georgia team did on the field here as a part of our Pella Windows postgame show. All right, here on the phone, looks like some comments are going to pull up here. So let's see if we can kind of get going on this, give you a chance to respond and talk about anything you want to, and maybe at some point in time I'll get a little bit of a signal here, and we will see if we can do that. Obviously, just a disastrous day. Probably certainly a day that Jake Fromm wants to forget, a day in which the Georgia running game just could not get going. And I wrote about this in the forum at forum.DawgNation.com, that the one thing that's been missing from Georgia's offense here this season are those big, long runs from running backs. Georgia last year finished the year in a tie for 4th in the country of runs of 20 or more yards with 37 for the season. At the halfway point of the year now, through 6 games, Georgia only has 10. They're barely in the top 40 when it comes to that. An example of Georgia being off-brand all year long. What we've come to expect from UGA, dominating the line of scrimmage, this team, for whatever reason, is not doing that. All right, I'll get some Facebook comments coming up here. Let's see where we go here. Marcos Burgess says, the hell with recruiting, BA. This season is the X's and O's, and they're not any good. Hard to imagine anyone coming to the conclusion of anything other than Georgia getting out X'd and O'd in this game here today. I think you'll credit Will Muschamp. I thought he had a pretty good game plan in a couple of regards. And there were long stretches of this game where it didn't look like Georgia could have scored on an empty field. So clearly something's going wrong with Georgia with how it calls its plays. All right, we got a lot of folks rolling in here now, and I've got a signal on Facebook so I can take some of these. We'll get to YouTube here in a moment. Kyle Andrew Hitchcock says, sad day. Fromm must not feel well, not in his element today like normal. The calls were a joke. Yeah, obviously Jake Fromm's sick about this. Really, I mean, every Georgia fan is sick about this. And y'all know, I mean, I'm a fan. You know, I'm more than just a guy that talks about this stuff for a living or writes about this stuff for a living. I mean, the average sports writer will file a story and go home, and he won't lose a minute of sleep over this. I'm a little bit different there in that regard, and all of you probably know that. Hopefully you appreciate that one way or another. It just sort of is what it is, so I'm right there with you. This is a disappointing day. This is a disappointing day. Georgia will be the laughing stock of college football for a long time until somebody, some point this season, has a worse loss than this one, and I'm not quite so sure it's going to come. So, yeah, it's not a good day. Not a good day. Nick Huntley on the subject of the end of regulation with Rodrigo Blankenship. Nick, I'm glad you brought that up. Georgia had a chance to try a 55-yard field goal. Did not do that. If you gave me 1,000 hours and a thesaurus full of words, I couldn't describe to you with any coherency whatsoever what Georgia was trying to do at the end of regulation. I'm not sure they knew. I don't have any idea what was trying to happen at the end of regulation. In fact, if some of you do know what Georgia was even attempted to do, maybe the TV broadcasters have had a better handle on this. Georgia seemed baffled and lost at the end of regulation. A 55-yard field goal is obviously not a gimme. Of course, Blankenship unfortunately missed the field goal there from a much shorter distance in the end of overtime, but the fans in the stadium obviously wanted Blankenship to get a shot there. Once you had the emotion penalty or whatever it was, you're not going to try the 60-yard field goal. And obviously Georgia's worried about a block because a block could have ended the game. But for a lot of people, they wanted to see Blankenship get that shot. Me, I would just be more satisfied if I thought Georgia had some idea what it was trying to do there. But difficult to ascertain what the plan was from Georgia there at that moment. Mike Madden says they have no playbook. It's the same boring plays every time, too predictable. What's interesting to me about that, Mike, is I actually thought in the early going of today's game, you really couldn't call the Georgia play calling predictable. Now, by the time the game was over, they had certainly gotten there with the run up the middle on first down, the run up the middle on second down, and sort of a desperation throw on third down. They definitely got there. But I actually thought that the play calling at the beginning of the game, to me, showed a bit more imagination than we've kind of come to expect from Georgia. Thought they did a pretty good job of getting Lawrence Cager involved in the game. Of course, after that, he seemingly was injured again because he wasn't heard from since. Try to get George Pickens involved, throwing the ball over the middle of the field a little bit. Threw the ball 23 times in the first half. That's more than they threw it for the entire game against Vanderbilt. So somebody in the forum said this, and we're following along in the game at forum.dawgnation.com during the game. And frankly, I could talk for an hour. I couldn't make a better point than this. At the early going of today's game, first half into the start of the third quarter, it wasn't that Georgia was too conservative. It just wasn't explosive. They were throwing the ball. It just wasn't amounting to very much. They were trying to run the ball. It just wasn't amounting to very much. You know, somewhere towards the end, it started to look like that, run up the middle, try the best you can to get a passing play going. It kind of got there to being conservative or predictable, whichever of those two words you want to use. But in the first half of today's game, that wasn't really the case. They just couldn't maximize their opportunities. Cager, the biggest receiver for Georgia in the first half, even he only averaged like 9 yards of reception. So you had the big play to Edwards, for instance, by South Carolina. Big play in this game kind of belongs to them on the other side, and Georgia's left to wonder where it goes from here. Thanks for being with us as part of our Pella Windows Postgame Show. We're going to take your comments, as many as we can. James Bryant says a very long field goal would have been a low, but it's a bigger chance that you get it blocked. And ultimately, if that's the case, I'm fine with it. It was just the absence of any other plan beside that. I mean, Georgia's down in an area in which you ought to try to go for a score. So if you don't want to try the 55-yard field goal, if you don't think that Blankenship is going to make that, or if you think that the percentage chance that he misses is high enough that it's not worth the block, I'm sort of fine with that overall. But what else were they trying to do? That's what I couldn't quite figure out there. Why not Hail Mary and, situations like that? Clifton Jackson says Sam Pittman amassed a similar size line in Arkansas and had comparable results. I love my dogs, but the line play. Yeah, listen, a day like this, it's kind of maddening because I cited some of this stuff on DawgNation Daily this week. If you look at the stats in terms of how you measure offensive line production, line yards and stuff rate and things like that, Georgia actually, statistically speaking, is doing pretty well. But there is no doubt about this that South Carolina seemingly today had the plan to combat the big offensive line from Georgia with a little bit quicker play, maybe more physical play, or maybe it's just stuffing the box, whatever you want to say it was. And the big offensive line for Georgia today was not much of a help, and that's just true. And over the course of the season, that's kind of been true more so than not. Georgia's not busting open the big running plays. Georgia's not dominating people the way that they once were in that regard. A little bit against Vanderbilt, but maybe not quite as much against the other opponents that it's played. The team that beat them today, South Carolina. Now, Gamecock fan tunes in. I'll give a little bit of credit to South Carolina. I thought they played pretty well. But what I don't want to hear Kirby Smart say after this game is, hey, why are y'all asking all these questions? That's a good team on the other side of the field. I'll be happy to give them credit for the way they played today, but this is still a team that got beat bad by Missouri and lost to North Carolina to start the season. So I'll congratulate the opponent for how it played up to a point, but that for me is not going to be an acceptable excuse from the Georgia coaches about why this game what it was today. Jacob O'Neill says, we're still good. We've just got to win out from here. And that's not necessarily wrong, Jacob. It's not necessarily incorrect to say that Georgia is still fine and in great situation as long as it wins out. I think what most of your fellow Georgia fans who are watching right now are going to say, and boy, it's hard to argue with them at least at right now, based on the way that Georgia looked today, could you make winning out a reasonable prediction? Could happen, very well might. But, I mean, let's call this what it was. This is not the kind of thing where you dust it off and say, oh, well, let's get back to the business of watching Georgia winning next week. I mean, as of right now, the way that Georgia played today, even Kentucky next Saturday is no given. So you are absolutely right that the season is not over. There's still plenty to play for. But at the same time, I think what you're going to hear from Georgia fans in the comment section is more of an issue of how can Georgia reasonably expect to win games playing the way that it did today. And frankly, what you saw for the totality of the game today was not too dissimilar to what you saw for stretches of the Tennessee game, stretches of the Notre Dame game. And, you know, we're always wrestling with the idea of, well, how much of this is just unrealistic expectations from Georgia fans? How much of this is a real cause for concern? Well, the people who sounded the alarm after the Fighting Irish and the people who sounded the alarm after the Tennessee game, as of right now, they're getting a little bit of the last laugh. They're certainly getting a chance to say, see, I told you so, because what we saw in spots in those games, we saw for virtually the entirety of this game, truly a harbinger of bad things to come based on the way that Georgia had played in its previous two games before this. Alan McGovern talking about the idea of no real breakout threat this year. Jim Goodman says, I love you, BA. I'm too depressed to keep listening. Well, Jim, we'll try to commiserate over this, and I certainly would love to have you stay with us, but I understand a lot of Georgia fans are going to be disappointed today. I do get all of that, and I wish I had better news. I'd love to be able to sort of wrap this up in a silver lining for you and say, yeah, listen, it's going to be fine. Georgia's going to be great. Everything's set up for Georgia the way it's supposed to be. That may still happen, but very few people are going to predict that to happen based on where we're sitting here right now. This was a shocking loss. Georgia has lost a few times in the Kirby Smart era, and since 2017, I don't know that any has kind of caught you from out of nowhere and just absolutely just been a haymaker to the jaw the way this one is. At Auburn in 2017 or at LSU in 2018, while those were disappointing losses, you knew you were playing a tough opponent on the road. This was a game in which Georgia opened the week as a 24.5-point favorite. And boy, at no point in this game was it anything other than going to be lucky to even eke out a win. And in the late stages, it wasn't even able to do that. All right, do I dare try to pull up YouTube here for a second? The Facebook was working pretty well. We've had all kinds of issues when it comes to the internet signal here, but hopefully it's kind of coming up. We'll see if we can get the YouTube going here, and we'll see if we can get some YouTube comments going as well. Still having some trouble with the laptop. It looks like the phone's working pretty well. So let's see if I can get some phone comments when it goes on YouTube as a part of a Pella Window Postgame Show. And as they're loading up, I will say it's great to have Pella Window as a part of our Pella Window Postgame Show. You know, Pella Window and Door can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They're a national company. They got a local branch right here in Georgia, so you can reach out to them in Dunwoody and get in touch with them. And they're going to take really good care of you. We love our friends at Pella Window and Door. All right, over here on YouTube for a moment. Michael Kelly says Kirby Smart and old school football doesn't work anymore. You're more predictable than they should be. Georgia Peach says some of that stuff from the past kind of caught up with Georgia today. Jonathan Crump says I don't have any faith left. And, you know, I tried to touch on this a little bit during the show this week. For a lot of Georgia fans, faith has been shaken a little bit. Even though the individual game performances have kind of never been better, the level of domination that Georgia showed over the last couple of years has never been better. There were a couple of moments over the last couple of years where it seemed like Georgia was so close and then the moment doesn't come. And, there's kind of this quiet unrest of faith being shaken. And a day like today, for a lot of fans, unfortunately, is going to add to that even more. More fans saying, boy, I don't even know what to believe anymore, or I don't even know what to predict. I mean, obviously, that's the other thing is and listen, I get my predictions wrong all the time, but in terms of this game being a little closer than it could have been, certainly you could have expected that. The idea that Georgia would be a fight for its life in the fourth quarter, go to overtime, eventually lose, there's just not a part of me that thought that was even possible. It's really amazing, and for someone who talks for a living, I'm almost at a loss for words right now. Stephen Pugh says I should use carrier pigeons instead of the internet. Sometimes after the game's over, y'all know how it goes, but looks like we're kind of a little bit better shape now on YouTube. TM says this is the worst coaching performance I've seen in some time. It's going to be hard not to blame this one on coaching. It is. And I try to be a little bit self-aware about stuff like that because, on the one hand, I know how easy it is to sort of Monday morning quarterback every decision, to sort of second-guess everything. And obviously the coaches, whether it be Kirby the head coach, Coley the offensive play caller, the defensive guys who really, for the most part, did their job today. But all these coaches they have a wealth of knowledge available to them that none of us have. They understand the game better, certainly, than I ever will. So it seems, in one respect, foolish to second-guess them. But what else are you supposed to do when you've got just stacks and stacks of talent, when you overwhelm your opponent, when you beat this same team, probably even better version of South Carolina on paper, certainly a much healthier team a year ago when they played in September, when you dominated them the way that you did a year ago, and you can't even eke out a win in your own home stadium, how do you not end up saying, how did coaching help Georgia? How do you not get to that question at some point in time? I don't think that's an unfair thing to say whatsoever. Big CJ Everyday Brother taking some pointed criticism at Jake Fromm. And, listen, Fromm's a big boy. He's quarterback of this team. He knows the attention that he's going to get. And, this is a day in which Fromm's going to get some attention. Fromm played a bad game today in every way you can. The first interception he threw was just a horrible, horrible decision and a really bad throw. So in terms of, how you break all this kind of stuff down, Fromm's not going to be spared from any of this either. I think that's unfortunately kind of a fair point that Jake's going to take some of that criticism for this here today. Also, people mention the receiving decisions that Georgia's making, the guys they're having in the game, and, late stages here, a throw to Charlie Warner, which I don't mind, but it's the only time it happens all day long. Tyler Simmons involved, late in the game here. It seems pretty clear that there's just a sort of haphazard pecking order of who gets the ball in any play and in any moment, and it's hard for fans to follow along with, and it doesn't seem to make much sense in terms of the results on the field. It's pretty obvious that Georgia's got 4 playmakers they can trust in the passing game right now. Pickens is maybe the top of that list. Maybe it's Lawrence Cage, but there are 2 of them. Demetrius Robertson is one of those guys. I think Dominic Blaylock is now supposed to be the 4th based on kind of what you saw from him in a couple moments today. When you're not throwing the ball to those 4 guys, when you're throwing to other people, I think you've got some questions to answer as of, are you truly getting your best playmakers involved? The other thing I'll add on that is, when you watch Fromm with time to throw and no one to throw it to because of the defensive scheme that South Carolina is in, you're also kind of left to wonder, well, for all the size that Georgia has, are they missing a speed quotient? Listen, we're going to just be reaching for everything and grabbing at everything and throwing stuff against the wall in the hopes that it'll stick to try to figure out some sort of answer on this. But that is one of the things that comes to mind. The guys that that Georgia has that bring the speed to the table, guys like Robertson, guys like Cook, who got more involved late in this game, it seems, are those guys supposed to be more a part of this game plan? Is Georgia, not only from a rhythm of how it runs its plays, but also the guys it's choosing to run them to, is Georgia just lacking an element of speed right now? I think everything's got to be on the table to be discussed based on kind of where we are at this point in time, and so we'll keep doing that. More of your comments coming up on YouTube. Tramdog says it's our turn to be underdogs, and yeah, Georgia gets to be one now. Georgia had some national media folks picking it to win the national championship before the start of the season. We've been kind of wondering, would Georgia ever have any doubters? Well, it's got some now. It's got plenty, and probably justifiably so. An awful, awful loss for Georgia. The most embarrassing of the Kirby Smart answer, or I should say the most embarrassing of the Kirby Smart era, one that leaves a lot of Georgia fans looking for answers. I'll try to get some now as well as I welcome in Jeff Sintel here to the program, too. I'm going to take a lot more of your phone calls, and I should say phone calls. It's not a radio show. I'll take a lot more of your comments coming up, give you a chance. Let me slide over and make a little bit of room for Jeff here. Jeff, this was total, utter humiliation for Georgia against an overmatched opponent that it made look like the Super Bowl champions. You're down there on the field. You're watching this happen. What do you make of what happened today?
Yeah, we could fill up a 2-hour show with a lot of this, Brandon. A few snippets. You hear the South Carolina staff talking after the win. Kingsley Enabar, a guy from Hateville Charter Academy in Atlanta, one of those guys that was considering Georgia. South Carolina wanted him more. He was the one that was waving the flag afterward. I heard some South Carolina staffers say they love to play spoiler. Georgia doesn't have to worry about the playoffs anymore. And while I'm on my way to the bookstore, it's a classic Georgia moment, Brandon. There's a couple. The husband is saying, you know, I still love my life after this game. And yet the wife is, something's wrong with our city, something's wrong with our state. This is a very bad game. Hey, folks, that's the color. The reality of it is Georgia turns the ball over 4 times. Jake Fromm throws it for 51 attempts. Couldn't get anything going. And Georgia, if you want to know if this game says anything about Georgia, it says that they're definitely not good enough to beat South Carolina when they turn the ball over 4 times. The post-game press sessions, I thought it was very intriguing when we spoke to Rodrigo Blankenship. Of course, he says he's going to look at himself in the mirror. He's going to check out that film to see what he did wrong. When asked about the end of regulation, here's the part where I found interesting. He told Coach Fountain before the game he was good from the 38-yard line in. And so when Georgia was trying to chip away and get a couple extra yards, the illegal shift happens. It drops Georgia back outside his range, and he never gets a chance to send this game home before overtime.
Should they have tried the 55-yard field goal? Because by comparison, I told our audience before, if you gave me 1,000 hours and a thesaurus full of words, I couldn't describe to you what Georgia was trying to do in absence of trying the 55-yard field goal. They were just standing around staring at each other. This was a team that looked lost today. The end of regulation will end up, I think, being the image that probably signifies that more so than anything else.
Yeah, to me, it's simple football. If Rodrigo Blankenship, and hey, he's one of the best players on the team in my opinion, if he has a chance to end the game in your home field after coming off the mat when you had to score to tie late, and he's got a 55-yard field goal, you had no timeouts left there. I don't know what was happening there when Georgia was trying to get a few more yards to turn a 55 into a 51 or a 50, especially when everybody knew they were going to run an out route and something to the boundary.
Yeah, that's the other thing, too. It's like they know where the play call is going. They know you're trying to get a shorter field goal. They know you want to stop the clock. Surely they must know that the other team knows exactly what they're going to do in that spot.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Brandon. You know, I'm just trying to report a lot of the things the guys said. DeAndre Swift said after the game it's definitely disappointing, but he thinks this team will have to look at this loss, even though it's a little gray area here because South Carolina is not LSU. But Georgia will have to look at this loss like last year's LSU game, rebound from being staggered, and come back and close the kick on the final half of the season. Brandon, let's reset everything. I'm sure you did. The home streak is gone. The SEC East streak is gone. And really, a lot of folks are going to look at this Georgia football team and think, you know what? Something is amiss right now with what everyone thought they could be. You have an all-time one of the worst games of Jake Fromm's career, gives up a pick six, the fumbled exchange. You know, when we spoke to Jake after, one of the first things he said was, I got to look at the film. I got to make sure I was making the right decision, putting the ball where it needed to go. You see Georgia lose Brian Harrion. You saw a lot more of DeAndre Swift, Zamir White. They could still run the ball against South Carolina, but I'm sure everybody out there in DawgNation.
They didn't run it that great.
78 yards, 45 carries. I think the main thing DawgNation is thinking is all those times when Georgia had a 2nd and 8 and they continue to run the ball. So many times tonight, George Pickens was elevated on a ball and trying to make a play, trying to stretch the field. Brent, I think the biggest point of the game to me, and there are a lot of them, was when Georgia was trying to come back in overtime and the ball slips through Tyler Simmons' hand. And Israel Marinaku, another guy that South Carolina got because they wanted him more than Georgia. I remember a few years ago, Israel was in that end zone watching Georgia. He gave Georgia a late official visit, and now he comes up with 3 interceptions in a big win for South Carolina.
I'll tell you who else beat up Georgia going back to recruiting trail was Rick Sandage. Rick Sandage was all over the place in large stretch of this game. And I want to let you hear from you more, Jeff. Let me remind folks about our Pella Window Postgame Show. You can get in touch with Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. They've also got a great offer right now. You can get 50% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. That's valid through November 14th, so you've got to take advantage of that right now while you can. A couple different ways to get in touch. The website, pellasoutheast.us. That's pellasoutheast.us. Or give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. All right, I've got comments working on both sides now, so we can do everything everybody wants to now. We're just going to run through a bunch of comments. Kevin Crink says, why is everything up the gut? Our huge offensive line can't pull. Jeff, both those issues are pretty hot topics right now. A lot of between the tackles running for Georgia today that went absolutely nowhere. And even though statistically speaking it still looks like the Georgia offensive line is having a good season, this is another game where when it kind of mattered most, or really in terms of setting the tone and kind of establishing a pace for the game, the Georgia offensive line just wasn't able to get that done today. What do you make about the fact that with our own eyes, based on the eye test, it looks like the Georgia offensive line is not as advertised in some key moments today included, where the big, gigantic, rushing plays, they're just not there for Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, let's be frank, Brandon. This offense and this philosophy is not going to win Georgia a national championship, especially with what's going on right now. And I know that seems like a given. I'm talking about the overall philosophy. I think I put in the forum thread with a lot of things swirling through my head at halftime. What was the theory? Georgia was just going to chop away, and it looked like eventually wear down South Carolina. Well, this offense needs a little less chopping wood to clear a forest and a little bit more explosive napalm to get it done, because this isn't going to work against the quality opponent.
Yeah, I said this before you got here. Somebody put this in the forum today. I thought this was a great point. Georgia actually wasn't too conservative today, all things being equal. This is the most passes Fromm's thrown in any game in his career. They just weren't explosive. They were trying to be aggressive. They just couldn't do it. They just failed. It'd be one thing if – I know you see, well, there's a lot of those late-game runs up the middle, but if you look at the totality of the play calling, Georgia was trying to do more. They just can't, or they just don't know how to. They were absolutely befuddled by Will Muschamp and T-Rob's defensive game plan for the Gamecocks.
For the first time this year, and I think most people will go, yeah, that's pretty much a given because it seems obvious, Brandon. I thought tonight was the first time where a Mel Tucker, where a Jim Chaney, for whatever you want to say, the steady hand, or maybe the veterans that you see, it's because we're looking at that second half and a lot of play calls. It was always like, what is Georgia doing here? They got boo birds in the crowd. There was one point where Zeus ran a carry into the middle of the gut, and he got like 4 yards. And this time it wasn't Zeus. It was the boos. And I think, the end of the game, I know we covered that if you guys are just jumping in or getting in your cars or getting on your phone. The end of the game, when you have a potential Lou Groza winner in Rodrigo Blankenship, and we learned afterward that the 38-yard line is what he discussed with Scott Fountain, that he's good to go anything from 38 yards in. Georgia's on the 38, and then they still try to get a few more yards there in the end, and that results in the illegal shift. And Georgia never gets the chance to keep this game out of overtime.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the main thing I think about.
Thomas Simpson says UGA obviously not prepared today, but that's not an excuse. Probably that's certainly a fair thing to say.
Stock in everybody says the bye week. South Carolina had an off week to prepare for Georgia. I don't put a lot of stock into that at all.
It certainly doesn't hurt, but it shouldn't get you beat if you're, what Georgia was coming in today, a 21.5-point favorite.
The other thing that people should bring into mind here is, Ryan Helinski got hurt really early in this game. He was limping through maybe the back 20 reps he had in the game. And then finally he goes out of the game. South Carolina brings in DeKirion Joyner, and they mostly go ground and pound after that and try to hold on to a lead with their defense. But you can talk about Brian Harrion being hurt for Georgia. You can talk about Georgia shuffling in a lot of personnel, but South Carolina was having the same issues as well.
Yeah, somebody said that South Carolina has scholarship players too, and they do. We're going to give credit to the way that South Carolina played, but this is also a Georgia show. We're not going to sit here and celebrate South Carolina all day long. We're going to figure out what went wrong for UGA. Easy Brown says Cager was reliable, D-Rob was reliable, Pickens was reliable, Blaylock was reliable. Outside of those receivers, not happening today. That, to me, is the simplest fix for what's wrong with Georgia. They are spending too much time involving offensively guys other than the ones you just mentioned. Pickens, Blaylock, Robertson, and Cager. That's 4 guys. You only play with 3 at a time anyway. You better have – I said those 4. That's 4 guys. You only play with 3 at a time. You better have a very good reason. I mean, you better have a defensive back having fallen down to throw the ball right now to anybody other than the 4 names I just mentioned.
Yeah, and you mentioned another name to think about, Cager. It seems like he's getting nicked up a lot right now for Georgia. He was out during those clutch moments of the game, and Jake Fromm even said afterward that's a guy that he sure would have liked to have in there during those moments. What the players said is they told Hot Rod Rodrigo Blankenship after the game they have his back. They know how important he is to the team going forward. They're going to move forward to this. Kirby Smart, in his very brief remarks to the team, said, you guys got to pull together, you got to rally together, you got to come together. This is not the time when the team falls apart, but
I'm going to say this right now. I don't blame Rodrigo Blankenship for one thing. For a team that's the number 3 team in the country, a field goal attempt is failure, okay? Rodrigo makes it, Rodrigo hits it, whatever. College kicking is erratic. I don't have 1 ounce of blame for Blankenship here. I know he's heartbroken about missing the field goal. If you're the number 3 team in the country playing a team that you have drilled in the previous year, a field goal attempt in that spot's failure.
Yeah, and let me give a visual here. On the missed field goal, which South Carolina missed to give life to the Bulldogs at the end of regulation, that sucker was about that far away from the pylon. It was a very, very, very close call. And I really thought at that point the better team had been staggered. They were back on their feet. They were going to close South Carolina down after that, and it just doesn't happen.
Frank Watts brings up a good point on Facebook, and somebody's brought up the same thing on YouTube, and I want to make sure we address this with you because I think you're a good person to ask this about. So, obviously, in a day like this, we're like sort of reaching and grabbing for whatever, and everybody's going to have their own theory about what went wrong. But there's one thing that I've also noticed as well that Frank brings up, some other folks have brought up. Is Georgia missing a speed element right now? Is there just some speed missing here? And you can maybe say it on both sides of the ball, but primarily on offense where, Fromm at times has time to throw today. He's looking for someone to throw to. Credit to South Carolina for its defensive game plan. They filled up the passing lanes, and no one was getting open. Now, I'm not trying to play the blame game of its receivers, not Fromm for the bad game. There's plenty of blame to go around here, and Fromm made some horrible throws. So, he feels as sick about that as anybody does. But you kind of wonder, where's the receiver that runs away from someone? Where is James Cook, who does get him more involved in this game late? For the most part, absent in the early stages, he's got the speed. Robertson's your speedy receiver. You almost wonder if Georgia's just missing that speed element. I can say the same thing on the pass rush there as well. You see Nolan get more involved later on, but you've got a situation where Georgia is close to getting a bunch of sacks, but just like a step slow every time. Is there just like one more degree of speed on both sides of the ball that's the difference between Georgia being pretty good and not quite good enough to avoid an upset today?
Yeah, so the things that it's the Mecole factor. It's a stretch the defense scare factor in there. This wasn't Fromm's day, and obviously the stats say that, but there were a couple shots downfield, Brandon, where they tried to connect with George Pickens, and the ball was like this far away from his fingertips. And Pickens is not a speed burner or a guy like that that's going to hit the 9 route on a lot of folks. That's just not his game. But Fromm wasn't accurate enough like he normally is to make those plays. And, Brandon, the thing that just resonates through my mind about this game, and I'm just going to say what needs to be said. You look at that South Carolina football team, and somehow with a cadre of players that Georgia recruited a little bit, but didn't want as much as other players, that stocked that South Carolina sideline where Georgia could have got a lot of those South Carolina Gamecocks that beat them today. They come into Georgia, they win the line of scrimmage, and they beat the team that maybe thought that they weren't good enough to play at Georgia.
Oliver Clement says, why was Georgia so conservative in the first half again? Oliver, here's the thing. They really weren't. They threw the ball 23 times in the first half today. That's more than they threw the entire game against Vanderbilt. I didn't go back and look at 2018 games and 2017 games to see how frequently they've thrown the ball for a game less than 23 times, but it's going to be some. Georgia threw it 23 times the first half today. They weren't being conservative. They're just not explosive. They're trying to. I mean, I know that our mind will be left with all those runs up the middle that kind of went nowhere. I do get all that. Brian Schottenheimer style offense. I get all of that. But if you look at the total picture of the game, Fromm attempted more pass attempts today than any game in his career at UGA. They were trying not to be conservative. They just couldn't figure anything out. South Carolina was essentially laughing at them with its defensive game plan.
Well, what they did basically is they just ran those bread and butter plays up the gut, inside the tackle box, like you said. And they don't come out and they don't attack the perimeter with their run game. And it's just a lot of things where Georgia all these players that Georgia have that are supposed to be better. Well, South Carolina played a lot better football game today. And, of course, the pick six is magnified. The missed exchange for Georgia is magnified. Those are very un-Jake Fromm-like things, and that's what led to the defeat today.
Look, I want to get Chad Dewberry here because he responds. He says, BA, we're talking about conservative as in no big shots, screens and other plays, not dink and dunk. So on that, I feel like there's probably a little bit more to be said in response to that, because for as much as Georgia did try to throw the ball in the first half, if you look at those yards per target, you can do some of the same thing with Georgia receiving here right now. Here you're receiving, they don't have averages. I'm going to be terrible at math right now, but you're not really seeing anybody averaging 20 yards a catch or anything like that.
14 yards a catch for Pickens.
Pickens does have the 33. Other than that, Robertson has a 17-yard. Cager has an 18-yard. Simmons has a 14-yard. So from that standpoint, maybe conservative is the different word, and it's just not explosive, right? I mean, they're trying to make the passing plays, but those passing plays aren't really leading to what you need to lead to when you're not sending guys deep down the field. And by the way, no explosive plays in the running game either. Jeff, before you got here, I said that, if you look at Georgia last year, they were fourth in the country with rushing plays of 20 or more yards in the 20 or more yards, with like 37 on the season. After 6 games, that's the halfway mark of the regular season anyway. They're barely in the top 40 of that right now. They've only got 10 to this point in time. So what's happening here is not only are you still not getting a lot of the big explosive passing plays, but you're no longer getting the explosive running plays either. I know the stats don't necessarily bear this out, but what we see with our own eyes, this is just an average offense right now.
It's definitely not the offense that you're going to win the big ball games with, Brandon. There's a lot of – if you want to look at the defensive side of the ball, Brandon, I still think that defensive side of the ball, their absence of one or two more sacks a game, that is an SEC championship caliber defense. It's just the offense is just not there right now. And a couple of big picture things to pull away from this, Brandon. I take away for me, and here's the 10,000-foot view. I think this extends the Will Muschamp era at South Carolina. And the big recruiting visitor today, Jordan Birch, who showed up wanting to see Georgia do its thing. I wonder if it gives him a chance to look back towards South Carolina and go, you know what? That's a program I should consider more, because Georgia definitely didn't look the part of a national championship team today.
Yeah, I can't even talk about recruiting right now. I can't even talk about it. Winston Mott says, I'm not even sure average is the right term for it. Oliver kind of responded back a moment ago, and once again kind of saying the same thing. When he says conservative, he means the dink and dunk stuff. I think it comes down to a semantic issue for me. It's just, I understand what you mean when you say conservative, Oliver. It's just an absence of explosive, a total absence of explosiveness whatsoever. And a lot of folks keep pointing to the idea of the kinds of routes the receivers are running. I've joked about this before, that during games I have stuff that I put in the forum, I have stuff that I tweet, and I have stuff that I text. And the stuff that I text is obviously the much more private comments. But I joked with you last Saturday during the game, I'd pay $100 to see Georgia execute a slant route at some point in time. I just don't think they just don't have that. It doesn't seem like anyway.
Where's the slant route? Where's the wheel route to the backs? I think that'd be a great DeAndre Swift play. And here's the main thing. I think if you'd say you'd pay $100 for a slant route, I think they could pass the collection parade around Sanford Stadium now and raise about $1.5 million for Georgia to run a toss sweep in this offense behind all these linemen with these backs.
Well, here's the other thing, too. And, you can see here nitpick individual plays all day long. But on the fourth down Georgia does go for, I've begged for them to go for it more on fourth down. In this instance, they did. I've begged for them to get up the line of scrimmage and go. In this instance, they did. I've begged for them to, try to get Pickens involved. They did. I don't even mind the short throw to Simmons to set that up. But so help me goodness, do they not run numbers on how ineffective fade routes are just in general? Now, I know when you got big receivers, they're going to make those catches sometimes. But, y'all, the internet collects data on this kind of stuff. You can Google this and find out the least efficient passing route you can run is a fade route in that spot. And that's what Georgia runs on fourth down. It's the example of the kind of, magic 8-ball play calling that seemed to be going on all day long. And, Jeff, I'm self-aware when I bring this up. I know that every disappointed fan has Monday morning quarterbacked every loss he's ever seen his team take. I'm no different than anybody watching right now. I get the fact that they've got a wealth of information at their fingertips that we don't have. It's not as simple as I make it sound, but there are some individual plays you can point to and say, not just in this game, going back to Tennessee last week and going back to others and say, that's not as smart as it could have been done.
Yeah, and when you try to put the framework around this and you look at it, one of Georgia's best players, Jake Fromm, has one of his worst days as a Bulldog. When you see balls go off fingertips, when you see fumbled exchanges, when you see Georgia with one of their other best players, Rodrigo Blankenship, going to make a 42-yard field goal to extend the game, and those are the guys that Georgia wants to put the ball in their hands to win the game. And when those plays are not made, you can simply say, this was not going to be Georgia's day. I don't think Georgia came out ready to play at all. It was like a bocce ball game in the beginning of the game. The crowd, the players themselves, everybody was just kind of thinking, oh, it's noon, it's real early. Sooner or later, Georgia's going to do something to get a 10-point, 12-point, 17-point lead, and that did not happen. Brandon, the line was 21.5 points. Am I correct?
24.5 when it opened, 21.5 for today, yeah. Yeah, this to me today in terms of the atmosphere before the game and everything, this harkened back to an era that I don't think Georgia fans want to go back to. This was no juice in the stadium whatsoever, and I'm not blaming the fans for this. I'm not. It's the players' job to play. But there was no juice in the stands at all, and the team is kind of playing much the same way. It's their job to create the energy of the stadium. It's not necessarily the fans' job to do that. But, man, this felt like it could have been – I'm not even going to pick a year because I don't want to start, but there's some years this felt like it could have been.
Here's what I'll say. Since Georgia – got it together with rolling with the framework of their core leadership right now in 2017. This was the antithesis of that through a lot of all the phases. Now, the defense, like we said a second ago, I think the defense is there. That's a very strong championship contending unit, but the identity crisis is now Georgia, the physical team. Did they think they can reach back in their bag of tricks and become a tempo, a throw it around team? Like that was the get out of jail card or that get out of trouble card?
Let me follow up on this because John William Adams brings up a point that I'm not going to say it quite the way that he did, but I think it's a fair topic to discuss. I think part of the next few weeks is going to be because right now Kentucky's no given. I mean, Kentucky played with South Carolina for most of that game. I don't think the final score ended up looking more like a heavy Gamecocks game, but there is no team right now that Georgia can say, yeah, that's an easy win for us, Kentucky included. So I think leading into the Wildcats next week, bye week after that, and obviously what we at one point in time thought was going to be a crucial November stretch, now Georgia fans are left to hope that it's still a crucial November stretch. I think there's going to be a lot of talk about who your best 5 offensive linemen are because right now I'm not sure. Yeah. And to be completely honest, I'm not sure Georgia had its best 5 on the field today. Jeff, there's something going on with this offensive line. There's some spots in particular where some guys are not getting it done the way that I thought they would.
Well, I mean, what was the overwhelming thing going into this season? That the Great Wall of Georgia, that the offensive line was all that. And remember, Brandon, it makes me think of that the scrimmage, that was there for the McGill Society donors where it kind of got out that Georgia wasn't moving the ball. The offensive line wasn't moving the ball. The greatest offensive line in the country, and what would they do, 1 for 6 or something like that? Wasn't that the stat where they had 1 score in 6 possessions or something like that? And, Brandon, when this game is on the line, this is what you see. You see Isaiah Wilson in there. You see Jamari Salyer in there. You see Trey Hill. You see.
Wasn't Salyer mostly in as the 6th offensive lineman, though?
Well, I saw him as your right guard during those stretch parts of the game. But then you see at the beginning of the game, you saw some Schaefer. You saw some Kinley in there. Kinley's in there on DeAndre Swift's touchdown run, which seems like 6 years ago. And then you had Ben Cleveland in there at times. That offensive line, which is supposed to be the knockout blow, the building block of this offense, is not performing like the best offensive line in the country. And when that's not happening for Georgia, the core of their offensive philosophy suffers.
So I don't know if we can fit 3 people into the camera, but at some point in time I wouldn't mind hearing from Connor. I'd love to hear what Kirby – yeah, take your time. I wouldn't mind hearing what Kirby Smart kind of had to say today in terms of, how all this kind of goes down. We got, obviously, millions of comments coming in. Aaron Brown says, Fromm gives you one of these every year. Hope he's out. Look, today was not a good day for Fromm, and as a junior, you're supposed to play better than this. Now, listen, Jake Fromm's still done amazing things for Georgia. I think he's still going to do amazing things to come. Yeah. But I'm not going to sugarcoat this about what you got from your quarterback today. It was not only was it not a good game, it wasn't enough. And I don't know that Fromm was helped out by the guys up in the booth today, but at the same time, I mean, some of that is on Jake today, unfortunately.
Well, this is a game where, the Jake Fromm we've seen so far this season and what he means to this program, it's a Jake Fromm that pulls this thing out for the Bulldogs, and it becomes an ugly, skin of your teeth 20-17 type win or 24-20 type win for Georgia. You keep looking at all of these elements in the game. I think one of the first things Kirby Smart said is he said in his post-game presser as I was running up here, South Carolina won the line of scrimmage in that football game. Whew, that's something tough to say right there. And I'm sure everybody else, they're getting this information, pockets of it on Twitter. South Carolina comes into Georgia, knocks off the number 3 team in the country with a backup quarterback in there for the second half of the game. And then they decide to get some of those hedges after the game, which is what Georgia rivals do when you let them win on Georgia's home field.
Sure that – no, I'm not going to say that. Dwayne, somebody in our comment section, Dwayne, brought up a good point, though. If Kirby wants to say that the line of scrimmage was – got beat up on both sides. I'm going to give a little bit of credit to this Georgia defensive line today, though. Tyler Clark included. Now, there's the one, third and long that was it a keeper by Joyner that ends up converting that on that third and long there? Draw play, that's right. Yeah. That wasn't the defensive line getting blown up. Georgia didn't have any defensive tackles in the game. And they've been doing this for about 2 weeks here, where they get really cute on third down. They had Adam Anderson kind of over the center a couple times. It was Trayvon Walker a little bit last week. And South Carolina spotted that tendency and exploited it.
Yeah, I think the national narrative when they start looking at this is they say, okay, this is the same old Georgia doing Georgia things. But to me, Brandon, this wasn't the Georgia that had been established over the last 2 years with Kirby Smart in this program, the stranglehold they had on the SEC East. It was just kind of, you kind of kept looking as the time kept dwindling and the plays weren't there, the explosive plays weren't there, the gashes in the running game weren't there, that you kind of started to think, how is Georgia going to win this football game? I go back to the final seconds of the regulation. When you don't put the ball in Rodrigo's hand, when you've got a fizzling offense and let him try to kick you out of this thing from 55 yards to scrape away for 3 or 4 more yards, that to me puzzles me.
Stephen Swick says, what does this do for the SEC? So I'm going to allow myself to be positive for a couple minutes, and I will remind you of this. Alabama made the college football playoff in 2014 having lost at Ole Miss. Now, that Ole Miss team would have beaten the South Carolina team by 50 points, but just go with me for a second. Alabama made the playoff in 2014 having lost at Ole Miss, won the national championship in 2015 by losing to Ole Miss again at home. So in the playoff era, we have seen teams lose and still make the college football playoff. We've seen teams lose and win the national championship. Who am I leaving out?
Yeah.
That's right. Clemson loses to Pitt in 2016, still wins the national championship. So at a certain point in time, we will acknowledge that the season for Georgia doesn't have to be over. Georgia can still win the national championship. Undefeated seasons aren't all that common in college football necessarily. So if you are just the kind of person that just has to hear something positive, that's the positive. You can cite examples from the Clemsons and the Alabamas that losses don't necessarily end your season. That Pitt team that Clemson lost to in 2016 was no world-beating team. However, I just can't talk about that today. I can't spin it forward and say, well, now Georgia's just got to shake it off and get right back to work. There's a very good chance they'll do that. There's a very good chance they'll use the fuel and the motivation from this and come out and play better. But the last thing I'm going to do is, sit back here like some sort of, grifter and just say, hey, Georgia's going to shake this off and get better for it and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what's going to happen from here. It might be better. Statistically, it's certainly possible that it will be better. There are examples in the playoff era from when it was better. But based on the way that Georgia played today, I ain't predicted nothing no more. And I use bad grammar intentionally.
Yeah. So, what people want to say there, and, the guy that has his red and black Georgia, goggles on today is going to say, still controls their own destiny. Win every game.
I don't know if that's true, is it? If Florida wins tonight, they don't control their own destiny anymore.
Well, correct. But if Georgia finds a way to keep winning, they can still get to the game. They win the SEC East. They beat Florida. I realize that thing about the 2 SEC East losses. Georgia needs to root for Florida to lose a game. The point I'm making is there's a grain of truth to that. Like Alabama, for all of its great teams, they only had one team that went undefeated and won a national championship. The difference between Georgia and Alabama is what I think when Georgia has to go back to the drawing board and bounce back and examine what they go from here. And they got to look at it offensively. They got to look that offense in the mirror, and they got to say, what does Georgia do best to win a football game? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, Nakia Hester says you got to ask the question, is Kirby the problem? And I want to say this very clearly. I still have respect for Kirby Smart's coaching acumen. I mean, his overall leadership of the program as much as I did before this happened. Georgia is where it is because of Kirby's overall direction of the program. However, and I've been saying this privately to some people for a while, and I'll say it publicly now. If you go back and look at Alabama after 2013, that was a broken program. It was Gus Malzahn who was running the up-tempo offense. It was Gus Malzahn who had the exciting stuff going on. At the time, Alabama was only 1 year removed from having lost to Texas A&M, and Alabama was kind of lumped in there with Les Miles, the kind of slow, plodding coach at LSU. Nick Saban, being the self-preserving guy that he is, went out and outsourced his offense and went out and got Lane Kiffin, someone that had no real connection to him prior to being an analyst on the staff the previous year. And Kiffin had some control over that offense. They started playing faster. They started scoring more points. And all of a sudden, Alabama kind of joined the modern age of football with an offensive coordinator that a couple years prior to that I don't think you could have envisioned working for the Alabama Crimson Tide. There's a lot of football left in the season, but you start to wonder, at some point, is Kirby Smart going to have his Nick Saban 2013 moment when he realizes, I can't coach this sport the way that I have prior to this. I've got to go out and find someone who can usher Georgia into more of a modern age. And, even when I say that, I'm also going to realize that in the Rose Bowl at the end of the 2017 season, Georgia's ability to be physical throughout that entire game aided them in the fourth quarter when the passing game for Oklahoma slowed down. So the answer to this is not necessarily that similar, or I should say not necessarily that simple. You want to be a physical football team, but it's almost like Georgia has designed an entire program around protecting the defense, and I'm not quite so sure that's how you win a national championship.
You would think Georgia's going to have the pieces together offensively finally in the wide receiver room to do that. Is the identity going to be there? Is the mindset, is the change, the seismic change? I mean, Brandon, you can look at this as a key point of the Kirby Smart's time here at Georgia, how he moves forward from this. Is this going to be Georgia trying to win the games the same way they have in the past? I don't know if that's the answer. I think Georgia, from throwing it around, I mean, this was the word is deflating, and it doesn't feel quite like the 2016 losses because Georgia didn't have the pieces that they do now. This is a national championship type caliber roster that's not performing like one.
Michael Kelly brings up a good point on YouTube. Look what LSU's done this year. Now, there's a lot of football left to be played. Maybe the LSU passing offense doesn't finish the second half, whether it's played for the first half, but they go out and get Joe Brady from the New Orleans Saints, and that is a major, major change. I mean, statistically speaking, it's as big of a change. Now, Burrow did start playing better towards the end of last year for LSU, but in terms of what we've expected from LSU over the last 5 years, what we've seen in the recent 6 games, I don't know that I've seen a team transform more than they have. And I'm not quite so sure if things don't change much from what we saw today at the end of the season. We're not saying the same thing about Georgia here. They need to bring in someone to run the offense that doesn't necessarily have to answer to Kirby.
Yeah, the LSU offensive line, and it's to the point where they're basically going with a lot of guards and a center, not even true tackles at all, and that they have this great core of receivers in Burrow, and they're slinging it around, and that's their new identity, even though they have those 5-star running backs in the backfield. Pro style, the the play action game. I mean, Georgia doesn't even run play action a lot anymore, Brandon.
Yeah. Kirby on the offensive line has been a hot topic. Says, I want to talk about them. I want to talk about them being the best in the country, but they got to go out there and do it. Yeah, listen, and I realize that I'm going to take a bunch of heat from opposing fans this week, and I'm fine with that. I'm big boy. And probably no one's aided of the hyping of the Georgia offensive line more than me. I got a big microphone, and I talk into it every day, and I'm certainly contributing to all that. I can't do the hype stuff anymore. Not right now. It's just inappropriate. And I understand what Kirby Smart's saying there, that he wants to push that group to live up to its accolades. Right now, I just want to see if Georgia can beat Kentucky, and I mean beat them by any margin whatsoever. The goals are all still available to Georgia, but the expectations have been completely recalibrated.
Yeah, you would like to think that this would be a punch in the mouth that the team recovers from, but I'm going to say this simply. All this talk about the Great Wall, it's not a great wall. It's not playing like a great wall. And when you don't play like a great wall, you're not, because that's how you're measured, your DNA, your film, what you do on the film. It's a good wall with great players.
Karen Moses says she wants to hear more of what Kirby said post-game. We'll get Connor over here in a minute. We'll talk to him about that some. Winston Mock says, see Cook in the backfield. It's a pass. It is kind of funny, Jeff. This was the worst criticism of Kirby going back to 2016, probably some in 2017 there as well. When you had certain players in the game, you knew it was coming. For instance, and I love Trey Blunt. I think that Trey Blunt could play receiver for a lot of teams in the SEC. But when you had him in the game in 2017, you knew Georgia was running. They had passing receivers and running receivers in 2016. Is it getting more predictable when it comes to James Cook, a little bit as well? Now, I said before that his speed may be what Georgia's missing right now because Georgia just looks a little bit of a step slow there on offense. But there are a lot of people who can tell you, okay, if this guy's in the game, I think I know what Georgia's going to do. And maybe Cook's presence is an example of that. I don't know if it works out that way exactly, but it certainly seems like it works out that way plenty.
I mean, Cook, what goes through your mind with Cook is Cook's a great player, a potentially game breaker at times, but I don't know if Georgia knows how to utilize his skills right now, Brandon.
Yeah, let me get a little bit more Kirby Smart. Apparently he says he believes in Jake Fromm. Listen, I believe in Jake Fromm. I believe that Jake Fromm is a very good quarterback. You can't sugarcoat what today was, though. Jake will play better than this at certain points this season, but you can't sugarcoat what this is right now. And I think everybody understands that, right? Everybody understands that the guys that played poorly today will play better at some point in time. But let me see if I can bring Connor in here on this. Oh, sorry, you okay?
We're good.
Oh gosh,
Just saved my finger by that much.
By the way, while Connor's getting set up, there have been some injury questions being asked here a little bit. Yes, Brian Harrion, I guess it's a sprained back that he was dealing with. I don't know that Harrion played at all today. Maybe entered the game with a sprained back. We just found out about that during the game. Sprained neck for Schaefer, but Schaefer comes back in, and then 1,000 other things too.
Alabama moves to 24-10 against Texas A&M on the road.
Yeah. All right. So, Connor, you're there with Georgia players after the game. You're there with Kirby Smart. Pella Windows Postgame Show here live at the UGA Bookstore. Give me a little bit of an idea of some of the stuff that you heard.
Has Jeff talked about one stat in particular today about why this game was lost?
Tell me.
Georgia had 4 turnovers. I believe all of them were on going into the South Carolina territory. South Carolina had 0. That was Kirby's message afterwards. You can't turn the ball over 4 times and win. It's really hard to do that. And while that's a fair point, he also did mention that Georgia got pushed around at the line of scrimmage today. And if you're a team and a program that wants to talk up this, great wall and we're going to run the ball down your throats, when you get pushed around by a South Carolina team, they have Zach Pickens, and yes, they have Rick Sanders, guys
playing well for a while.
Guys who Georgia wanted are good enough to play here, but the reality is that should not happen. And actually, if I could tell a funny little story, Georgia was in trouble from the last play they did in pregame warmup because I've never seen this before. Right before pregame warmups end, they do a long field goal. Rodrigo made that. Then they do a short extra point. Rodrigo, who has never missed an extra point in his career in a game, doinked the extra point right before the team went in to wrap up pregame warmups. If that is a sign that this team was in trouble from today, it's pretty clear that it was. I thought the defense played outstanding today. I thought the offense really let them down. Defense hasn't given up a touchdown, has given up 1 touchdown in the second half. But, when your offense turns it over like it does, and Kirby did sort of touch on this, South Carolina's receivers or cornerbacks were very handsy and physical. And that did, I think, affect some of the guys, especially when they tried taking those downfield shots because the Georgia wide receivers had almost no separation today whatsoever. And quite frankly, this isn't the room of pass where you've got, 4 stars, JUCO transfers, guys like Javon Williams. You've got a 5-star player in George Pickens, a 5-star player in Demetrius Robertson, a high 4-star in Dominic Blaylock. You've got guys who should be able to get around this, and today they just weren't.
Going to get more of your comments, including Danny Austin here in a minute. It's our Pella Windows Post-Game Show. We're live here at the UGA Bookstore. And, of course, Pella Window and Door of Georgia can help equip your house with energy-efficient windows and doors. Now, this is not a good day for the dogs, but Pella is good folks. And they can give you great savings. They've got 50% off qualifying installations, or you can get 0% APR for 48 months. Take advantage of that before November 14th. There are a couple different ways you can get in touch with them. PellaSoutheast.us is the website. PellaSoutheast.us is the website. I really appreciate their support of our program. These are they love the dogs, and nobody's more sad today than our friends over at Pella. You can also give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Not a good day for UGA. There'll be happier days than this sometime in the future, but today is a day where things are not good. So I mentioned the commenter a moment ago, bring up the idea of the Florida Gators. Listen, at this point in time, I've been trying to tell you that Georgia wouldn't be challenged in the East. Georgia had built up such a recruiting advantage that it could count on the division and then move on. I mean, obviously, as I told Jeff a moment ago, Connor, I'm recalibrating all those expectations. I'm not telling you that Georgia's going to lose any games the rest of the way, But I'm not going to sit here and talk about how the games that Georgia is going to win because I don't know what I'm going to see from Georgia, both in terms of the level at which it plays and also the strategy that it employs. Even the players that it's going to play, everything is sort of different week to week.
I mean, did you see this coming, this kind of performance coming at all? You know, people have brought up slow starts before, but this was not a slow start. This was just poor execution. The interceptions that Jake Fromm threw, both of them, are just inexcusable. The third one, obviously, is not on him. It went off Tyler Simmons' hands. But it's just, this came out of nowhere, and that's almost more concerning than the loss itself because now, as you point out, you don't know what you're going to get week to week. And my big question is, so early on in this year, Georgia has made it a point to rotate in a lot of guys, play a lot of players. And I just wonder if that's affecting guys to get in a rhythm, affecting guys' ability to make plays, because when you're rotating in that much, it is really hard to play consistently well, knowing, hey, you might get pulled out every so once in a while. I know for a fact we saw that last year with Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. That definitely affected them, especially early on in the season. Fromm played his best game a year ago in the Florida game when Justin Fields did not take a snap. This is not a Fields-Fromm debate, but this is a Kirby, I think, needs to cut the rotation. He needs to play guys he can trust. And if you don't know who you can trust 6 games into the season, then I don't know what you've been doing for the first 2 months of the season.
Because it's one thing to keep substituting liberally over and over again if everyone's playing at sort of a similar level. And in 2018, I don't know how great the separation was from time to time. That's not the case anymore, Jeff. There are receivers who are contributing by leaps and bounds more than other guys. Likelihood of success when they are targeted by leaps and bounds more. Shortening the bench, if you want to have your best offense, at the very least you've got to do that.
Yeah, I mean, like when you lose a game like this, you go back into the room and you say, how do we win a football game? How do we build this back up? We're going to put the ball in this guy's hands, and we're going to do this, and this is how Georgia's going to win football games. Connor talks about a merry-go-round of players, and that's right. Georgia's doing that on the offensive line right now. They're doing that in their wide receiver room. I'm just going to make it pretty frank here. If the future rotations where you've got to get ahead and win games and play your best football, if the rotations are not Blaylock, Pickens, Robertson, and Cager, I don't know what they're doing. And Cager specifically was a guy Jake Fromm mentioned afterward because when he left that game and Georgia had to claw back and try to find a way to beat a 2-3 South Carolina team at home, he wasn't there.
Tim Wilcox says we bought into the rat poison. We got caught with our pants down, bad play calling, poor execution. We've certainly talked the last part of this. Jeff, and I kind of want to hear from you on this point as well. But you know, you've been around for a while. You've seen a lot of college football. Do you think there's a chance this Georgia team just believe, the rat poison idea? You think this team just believed too much of its press clippings, things that I've said, things that have been written? You think they just bought into that kind of stuff too much?
I don't think that's. I know everybody looks for an identity of this is the change agent for how Georgia lost. It goes back to you lose the turnover game by 4, you get yourself in trouble. You have the chances to win and you don't convert. I think it comes back to me is I don't know what Georgia does offensively to win football games and to put teams away. I don't know what they have right now offensively.
What about you, Connor? Was this a believe in yourself too much, get caught napping kind of game for UGA?
No, if anything, I don't think enough Georgia players have been watching DawgNation daily. But so Jeff made a really good point there, and when Georgia needs to make a play, when it's 3rd and 6, right now you don't know what they're going to do. And while some might make an argument that's a good thing, I'm going to make the argument that it's not because
not the way we mean in this case.
Right, because you need to have bread and butter in what you're going to be able to go to. And there were a couple times in this second half where it was 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, and it's sort of just like you're waiting every play and you don't have something you can bank on. And I do think they have guys they can count on. Demetrius Robertson played incredibly well today and incredibly well down the stretch. He's a guy who, as you pointed out, him, Cager, Blaylock, Pickens, those need to be the guys at wide receiver going forward. Yeah. It's just that.
But let me just respond back to this though, because I want to at least give credence to maybe it being more complicated than I'm giving it credit for. Because one of the things I said before you joined us is, Connor, the long runs have completely disappeared for Georgia. They are so far off the pace of what we've come to expect from them for 20-plus yard runs. Is it the kind of receivers that I say that Georgia ought to be throwing to that aren't blocking downfield that are preventing Georgia from having what really is? I mean, go back and look at the Kentucky game last year. Georgia walloped Kentucky in its own state. That's a top 15 team that had some big wins. Georgia walloped them with long runs. So are the receivers that I'm saying that Georgia shouldn't have on the field because they're not reliable receiving targets, are those your best downfield blockers?
I think this is a fair point to bring up. This is a team that probably really misses Jeremiah Holloman right now because he was excellent at that a season ago. He was going to be an incredible receiver this year for them.
I had not thought about Holloman in a while, but that's a really good point. He would have been a very important player to have today.
As far as springing the downfield blocks, I haven't even seen this team consistently get to the point where they're getting to those 10 to 15-yard runs, much less getting to a point where those runs can be sprung. And again, I think it goes back to this offensive line. They've been rotating in guys a lot. Cade Mays and Ben Cleveland, for whatever reason, there hasn't been a guy to sort of emerge and stay there and start there. Obviously, injuries have affected this line at a certain point. But I think on this offensive line specifically, this is a point where Kirby going forward, because this is the first year he's really done this, where he's rotated in guys in and out of positions, especially depending on sort of what the play call is or what the situation dictates. Kirby needs to find his 5 best offensive linemen and stick with them. Yeah. This kind of to me reeks of, we've got a lot of highly recruited guys. I'm worried about them transferring, so I want to try and give them some of the playing time. Reality is, after a loss like this, you just can't do that going forward. You can't please everybody. You have to play your best guys, period.
I'll let you respond to this. I also said before you join us, I think right now there's a real question as to who Georgia's best 5 are. And a couple of the guys I'm questioning right now are guys that we clearly have penciled in as a starter. I'm not quite sure what's going on at center right now, as a for instance, on this. I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked over the next couple of weeks as to who Georgia's best 5 are.
Right, and so this exact weekend a year ago, Georgia goes down to LSU and just gets its butt whipped. And then it has that bye week and it gets right for Florida. They don't have that this year. They got to go play Kentucky next week, and I know Kentucky's not a great team right now, but with the way this team played today, you just don't know what team you're going to see next week. And even, week to week, are we going to see the team that struggled with Tennessee for the first 20 minutes of that game? Or are you going to see the team that came out and, in the second half of every game this year, they've given up 1 defensive touchdown. And they need to find answers, and they need to shorten up who they are playing, because as much as the transfer portal looms over you, if you're worrying more about the transfer portal than playing your best guys, you're just going to get more and more results like you did today.
That's a good point.
You know what hurts you more than anything with the transfer portal? That's losing to these teams like that. That's losing games like that. Brandon, we talk about, what's that phrase, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any? But to me, when Georgia's trying to shuffle in 8 or 9 guys on the line and 6 or 7 wide receivers to stay fresh and wear teams down, and then you eventually don't do it, let's look at the targets. Let's cherry pick the targets late in that game, whether it's in overtime or Georgia's driving. They go to Demetrius Robertson for the touchdown. They try Tyler Simmons. They try Eli Wolf. And let's face it, without that, that was clearly pass interference. That was the right call on Jamie Robinson. But Georgia's going to Eli Wolf there with everything on the line, all the hopes and dreams for your season right there. That's the right read. That was the man coverage. But they're going everywhere, and yet you have a guy like George Pickens who can go get a ball on anyone. I don't see him get a ball in those red zone scoring situations. And it makes you think Georgia expects a Blaylock, expects a Pickens to put on the cape, show off that 5-star talent, and fix the explosive nature of how well they can make big plays and chunk plays in the throw game. You got to remember, still a freshman, still not getting a lot of reps, starting reps, in order to be that with all this division of playing time and division of snaps right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Some of this looks almost like, I'm not trying to be overly sarcastic, but it's almost like Georgia was coached today in the mini games like we're watching like the All-American Bowl or like the Under Armour Classic, where it's like, yeah, just throw it to whoever you want to, just have whatever 11 guys you want to. We'll rotate guys in and out. Kirby sometimes coaches this team like an all-star team, and you don't have all 11 guys on either side of the ball playing like all-stars right now.
Panel discussion here. Since Georgia got to be a legitimate contender for everything, let's label this the 2017 season. Is this clearly the most disappointing performance for Georgia since they became what Kirby Smart sees out of Georgia?
Well, I'm going to change your word, because it's easy to say it's the most disappointing, because obviously based on expectations, nothing could be more disappointing than this. I'm going to say, and I hope I'm not falling prey to recency bias, I'm going to say this is the worst loss in the Kirby Smart era, worse than last year's SEC championship, worse than last year's national championship, because nothing that Georgia has faced up to this point in time, at Auburn in 2017, at LSU in 2018, nothing that has happened up to this point has caused me to question Georgia's trajectory. I'm questioning it now. That doesn't mean it's not going to still be a national championship this year, but you better believe that both as an analyst and as a fan, my confidence in where this team is going from here, it has been greatly shaken by this, and that has never been true for me in the Kirby Smart era.
I still think it's the LSU loss from a season ago. I mean, today I thought the defense played outstanding. They gave up one touchdown today. The offense stunk today. There's no way to sugarcoat it for a variety of reasons: turnovers, play calling, lack of execution of the offensive line. But I think a lot of the things you said about questioning the trajectory, you had to do that after the LSU game a season ago. But this is certainly, this is just a loss that if Georgia wants to be that Alabama, if they want to be and consider themselves one of their elite teams, Alabama doesn't lose a game like this.
I think, Brandon, you stumbled on to me. I think it's the big hot point of this game for me. This is the first loss of the Georgia era where you start thinking, remember when Kirby Smart said Georgia's not going anywhere after the loss to Alabama in the national championship? Better days are ahead. This team is going to continue to get better out of this. I think this is a ceiling-defining loss for what Georgia is right now. It's a loss that makes you question everything. It makes you question how they win football games, what are they going to hang their hat on. If it's not a dominating offensive line performance, the run game's not there. If the run game's not there, they're throwing it around to receivers trying to make plays 51 times in a ball game. Connor used the word stunk, and I'm going to just amplify that and augment it. Even without the turnovers, the offense stunk when they weren't turning the ball over.
That's such a good point. Yeah, I mean, statistically speaking, if you have a -4 turnover differential, you're going to lose the overwhelming majority of those games. But even beyond that, it wasn't good other than the turnovers.
Georgia ran 95 plays today, Brandon, and they had 468 yards. You know the math behind that. That's basically 4.9 yards per play. Yeah. That stinks for a team that was wanting to be in Arizona at Christmas time and wanting to get Alabama and show we're bigger and badder than we ever were before.
Kathy Aquavi Green says Alabama lost twice to Ole Miss. We referenced that earlier, Kathy, and they made the playoff in 2014 and won it all in 2015. Connor mentioned the Clemson Pitt thing in 2016.
But those were good Ole Miss teams, like you said. Those were pretty good Ole Miss teams.
I can go up and down the list and find examples. That 2017 Oklahoma team that some people consider, potentially maybe the best team in the country that year, lost at home to Iowa State. Yeah. This loss does not end Georgia's season. It just simply cuts their safety net. They have no margin for error now going forward. They have to beat Florida, which was probably the case anyway. They have to beat Auburn. They have to beat Missouri. They have to beat A&M. And they have to beat whoever they played in that SEC championship game if they even get to that point. And based off what I saw today, I feel very comfortable saying Alabama won't play a game like that this year. LSU won't play a game like that this year.
You're probably right about that. So, here's the honest truth. Had Georgia found a way to pull this thing out in overtime, while as a fan I would have been so thankful that we're not doing all this after a loss, I actually don't know that the conversation's all that different. I don't think the look on your face is any different. I don't think the look on your face is any different. The look on my face is not going to be any different. The level of commenting is not going to be any different. We're really having the same show if Georgia wins this by a point or loses it by whatever the final score was. We're having the same conversation. So maybe this is easy to understand, maybe it's not. My anger today is more about how Georgia played than the fact that it lost. I wouldn't have been that happy had they played this way and won.
Yeah, this was one of those classic, late great Larry Munson moments where he would say we saved ourselves after this one. But even if Georgia saves ourselves, it looks like half the house is rendered asunder by all the chinks and the warts that Georgia showed in getting to this point. I mean, this is one of those where Georgia's best players looked bad today, all the way around. Yeah. And Georgia had to send the ball, put the ball in DeAndre Swift's hands 23 times today. They only get 113 yards out of it for a game breaker, big time back for everything. And, this is just not what Georgia football's been about, the manhandling, the wearing them down, the physical superiority. When you're not doing that, it shows a lot of problems.
We're here at the UGA bookstore, and they're always such a gracious host to us. And if I had to commiserate with a bunch of dog fans today, there's no better place I'd rather do it than here at the UGA bookstore. You don't talk about people that are just heartbroken today. Obviously, the staff here, Howard, the whole team, they're obviously devastated by all of this. But as I said before, we've had a great crop of dog fans kind of hanging out with us and doing the show with us today. And so listen, and same with the people watching. If we got to do it, I'd much rather do it with the people that we get a chance to both connect with online and here in person than by ourselves.
Can we talk about one point of this game and everybody, revolve around on this? What was South Carolina doing late in that game when they tried the 60-yard field goal?
It was really the only truly boneheaded thing I thought the Muschamp did all day long because, listen, I can just bore you all to death about win probabilities and things like that, but you got to understand the probability of getting a 4th and 3 compared to a 60-yard field goal. So it was a day in which I thought that Muschamp out-coached Kirby Smart, at least to the best that I could tell. Specific instances where I thought that Muschamp seemed to get the better of him. In that particular time, he really gave Georgia a gift, and Georgia can't take advantage of it.
If this were the NFL, this game deserved to end in a tie. Yeah. Neither team deserved to win this game. As South Carolina, before that field goal, scored 0 points in the second half. And I know they were playing with a backup quarterback, but reality is this game, if we're playing old college football rules, it should have been a tie. And honestly, that's the way, a loss feels just as bad as a tie in Georgia's case because, again, they were, they're a superior team to South Carolina. They're going to finish with a better record than South Carolina. And the reality is they lost to a team they're better than today, and that's just inexcusable.
So, Brandon, Connor had to go set up for post-game with Kirby Smart afterward, and that was a part where we had to drift past in the post-game locker room where there were still like 2 or 3 more minutes. Connor, I went back to Rodrigo, and I asked him about what was your line? What was the point where he said, I'm good from that point in? And, Connor, I want you to give me your thoughts on this. He said he told Scott Fountain before the game, I'm good from anything 38 and in. Of course, I'm going to try and kick anything you give me. But Georgia was at the 38 with 10 seconds left, 8 seconds left, and they try to go scratch out 3 or 4 more yards like they're looking for loose change in a couch. And then they got outside of his money line. That, to me, is another – what was that moment in this football game?
I would just bring up earlier in that game, they had about a 53-yard field goal blocked. And I do have to think that played that was going on in Kirby's head. He missed a field goal of that similar length earlier. Let's try and get him 3 and 4 more yards. And the reality is, play backfired. It didn't work. In that moment, I didn't hate the idea of trying to get 4 or 5 more yards there. It unfortunately just didn't work because, we saw Rodrigo. One, he had a field goal blocked earlier in that game, and then at the end of the game, he misses another field goal. And I know Rodrigo's been automatic all year, but you can't tell me that Rod missing that field goal right before halftime doesn't factor into what Kirby was thinking.
Okay, so I think you're bringing up a pretty good point, and I think it's a reasonable concern that the kick may have been blocked. Would you do me another favor then, since you're on the sideline and you're kind of watching from a closer vantage point than I am? In the absence of trying the field goal, what were they trying to do?
I believe they had run a 5-yard out route to Eli Wolf there. Get the first down at the very least, and try and get out of bounds.
But they were taking forever.
And it took too long to set up.
I know no one's in the mood to laugh. I thought for a second they were going to take a knee at the 38, and I believe at that point in time I just would have cried. I believe I would just lay down. Had they taken a knee at the 38, I believe I just would have laid down and cried.
How many people saw Jake Fromm today running around? If we're playing old school backyard football, he must have got to 9 or 10 Mississippi.
Some of the time he did, yeah.
Still couldn't find anybody. Nobody's getting free. And I think I'm going to ask a question here, and you're going to give how you answer this question maybe defines your final bottom line takes for this football game. Rodrigo Blankenship drills that 42-yard field goal. We go to a third overtime. Do you think Georgia wins this football game?
I don't know.
Do you think they?
I said this before you got here. I'm not sure that Georgia could have scored a touchdown on an empty field. I just don't know. Now, I want to read Dewey Lee's comment for a second, because I think this is the kind of thing we've been wrestling with in some form or fashion. I end up talking about this on DawgNation probably every day. He says, I feel like if you're honest with yourself and open-minded, you knew this day would come where we wouldn't move the ball and lose. Maybe not to this team, but it was coming. Here's the thing. Dewey, I don't know if I thought that or not, but one thing I'm going to acknowledge about your point is there were a lot of people who did. And when people complain in the forum during the Notre Dame game, there's this temptation to say, Georgia's beating a top 10 team. Why can't y'all just be happy? I started DawgNation Daily this past Monday kind of saying, why can't Georgia fans just have more fun? On the basis of having blown out a rival, at least by the margin of the final score. But the honest truth is, the complaints you've heard after the Tennessee game, the complaints you've heard after the Notre Dame game, the complaints you heard in a lot of games in 2018, because let's face it, folks, that was there back then, too. There was a lot of complaining even back then. Dewey's point of, if you're honest, you knew this was coming, there are going to be a lot of people, and maybe even subconsciously I'm one of them, that sort of quietly knew something's not quite right with this Georgia offense. And there are plenty of people out there that want to tell you what you want to hear who'll say, Kirby plays slow because he don't want to get players hurt, or Kirby plays slow because he's protecting the defense, or Kirby does this, or Kirby does that, or whatever else. But at a certain point in time, there are no more opponents to save your best plays for. At a certain point in time, there's no justifiable reason why it's not quite as impressive as you hoped it would have been. And as much as out of one side of my mouth, I want to tell fans, look, just enjoy the season, be happy with the wins, and, it'll all work itself out in the end. As Dewey says, there's plenty of people who are like, I've been trying to say something that's not quite right here. And you know what? One of the most, I think, disappointing things, not that I don't like these people, but one of the most disappointing things about the day for me is after a day like this, it's hard to say those people were wrong.
Yeah, you look at the games, and what's different about this game besides all the other ones? I think it's the 4-turnover battle, and immediately you go through your mind and say, is LSU good enough to be -4 in turnover differential and beat South Carolina? Is Alabama good enough to be -4 in turnover differential and beat South Carolina? I think the only way you can look at yourself in the mirror and find something less ghastly if you're the Georgia program is you go, of course, we lost the turnover battle. It's hard to beat anybody in the SEC when a program loses the turnover battle. You kind of compare that to, remember Georgia and Notre Dame? Georgia was kind of jostling with Notre Dame, and they finally closed out Notre Dame in the end. Superior talent, athletes, and all that. Similar game there with Tennessee. The difference tonight were those 4 turnovers, and I think it's not just the turnovers. I mean, this same cornerback ends up with 12 tackles and 3 interceptions. I think he's going to be one of the greatest Gamecocks of all time and coming back on radio shows 20 years down the line because he's the hero of the Georgia win. But at some point, you got to look at this and you go, why was Georgia turning the ball over? Why was Fromm so inaccurate? These are things because it feels like he was having to stretch. Brandon, I saw un-Fromm-like moments. Even when balls where Georgia was completing, his guys were coming to have to go back there and get them, which is like, Georgia got the first down, but, that probably would have went for 10 or 12 more yards if he had put the ball out there. When your leader, when the commander-in-chief is struggling, that's warts and that's problems all over the program.
Yeah, listen, Baracus Mills in our Facebook comment section earlier said, I can't believe BA is criticizing Fromm. I mean, y'all know my favorite thing about Fromm in the world is the fact that he can throw the ball into a mayonnaise jar. I mean, he can put it into like the tightest window you ever want to go into. It wasn't that today. I mean, even on the connections, it was off. The final deep throw to Pickens, I feel like if that ball's a little bit more on the money, maybe you get a chance to connect there. It's just, man.
Can I say something that'll make you laugh, that you'll enjoy? Feel pretty confident Georgia's game next week is going to be at 6 o'clock and not on 3:30 on CBS.
Yeah, at this point in time, I guess CBS. So the little twinkly lights, we get to see those again next week.
How do you get the nation all pumped up for Kentucky next week? What are your plans for getting everybody ready to breathe fire and brimstone for those Wildcats?
You need a win. You need a W. I tweeted this during the game. Y'all, we've been used to this thing where, it's like last year the sky was falling because Georgia beat Missouri on the road by 14 points. I mean, this was like just apoplectic state of DawgNation because of a 14-point road win. I tweeted this today. So this has been a long time since we've been here, but against a division opponent, Georgia needs to make every play it can just to win. So here's my message for the Kentucky game. Show up because hopefully Georgia will win.
What happens if this offense turtles a little bit and goes less explosive, less wide?
Less explosive than this? Are they going to play with 8?
I just mean they stop taking those shots. They condense themselves and just try to play New York Giants football.
New York Giants? It sounds like you're talking about the Air Force Academy.
I'm talking about the 86, 88 Bears where you just try and lean on the offensive line in the run game and try to lean on that defense. I think there's a really clear path here where Georgia decides this ain't it, or they overcorrect back to where they were.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to even come up with answers, which is kind of funny. I keep saying I'm speechless when I've been talking nonstop for nearly 2 hours now. So it's not quite speechless because I don't shut up, but that's the thing there.
What did you see as a turning point of the game? What did you see as a turning point of the game? The one where you went, okay.
Well, it's easy to say the first Fromm pick because, I mean, at that point in time, I think I realized it was going to be a game all day long. When did the weird botch snap and fumble occur? Because that's when I first started thinking the Fromm pick. I'm like, well, game's going to be close. The first the botched snap, I was like, man, Georgia actually may lose this game.
Very first play of the fourth quarter, I should say. And I would add, I believe that is the only time today Georgia took a snap under center.
Wow, because I never thought Georgia was going to truly lose. I thought it was going to be a dogfight and close. But not until that botched snap happened did I think that Georgia's going to truly lose the game. At that point in time, though, I became nervous. And it's a miserable experience because, on the one hand, I just want to be mad about the way they're playing, come on here and complain and do like everybody else does. On the other hand, I desperately want it to be better than this. I desperately want to be better than this. I've been telling Connor that I've been saving all my credentials from every game, kind of put them in a nice little stack.
What are you doing with this?
Because, you just want to have a commemoration of what could be a special season, and it still may be a special season. The people that keep pointing that up are not wrong to point that out, but it just stinks. Yeah. And I'm also, I've been talking a lot of trash. I'm going to hear a lot of stuff on this Twitter now for a little bit. So I'm going to need some of y'all to come to my defense on some of this.
When your best players don't play well enough for you to win the football game, doesn't that usually mean with a stacked roster like this that other guys rise to the occasion and bail them out? Where were those guys?
Yeah. Chad Gibbs brings up a pretty good point. It seemed like every shotgun snap today was low. Now, I don't know how low. Fromm didn't seem to be all that bothered by it, but every single one of them seemed to be low.
That's actually been an issue I've noticed in previous games where he's having to bend down. And, this is Trey Hill's first significant time playing center, repping at center. And, there were a few times today as well he got beat. Or didn't block his guy. And I think, Georgia, as you pointed out earlier, they've got to ask questions about this offensive line because it's certainly not a playing, at least in the interior. I think Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson have played well this year, but that interior of the line has to figure itself out.
I'm reminded of a conversation that you and I had before the game, obviously not on air, but we were both on the field. You were kind of pointing out some movement among some of the second-string guys we don't see playing a lot, maybe a little bit of a reshuffling of some of those second-string guys. I wonder if we're on the verge of maybe seeing somebody get a chance to play we haven't seen play a whole lot yet.
Maybe a guy like Warren Erickson at that center position, a guy who you'd like to think is a lot more comfortable at that position than Trey Hill is.
Yeah, Salyer's the guy that they'll think about there with the. Yeah, one of the things we're talking about, Connor, was. We don't even know who the best five linemen anymore because you saw Salyer in there late in the game when Georgia had to try to pull it out. You saw Mays at the left guard position. I think Thomas and Wilson were the two constants. But Kinley was in that game on DeAndre Swift's touchdown. Schaefer started out there today. And then you saw Cleveland continuing to rotate it in a lot of spots. Still seems to me like Georgia, with the way they employ Ben Cleveland, he's in the game when they want to road grade and run the football, and then when they need to throw it around, then there's kind of a tell when someone else comes in that maybe Georgia's going to throw the ball with what they're doing with Ben Cleveland.
Michael Kelly brings up the name Clay Webb. I don't believe that Webb has traveled to either road game as of yet. I know he didn't go to Vanderbilt. I don't believe he went to Tennessee last week either. And I think that Webb's going to eventually probably be a very good player at Georgia, but that kind of gives you a sense of kind of where he is right now. Has not made the 70-man roster yet, and by comparison, guys like, say, Owen Condon were traveling a lot for Georgia last year. So, not every offensive line that travels for Georgia plays, but right now, because of what we perceived as depth of this offensive line, Webb hasn't traveled yet.
Let me body check that one. You're talking about Clay Webb, who has not played extensively at center at all in real football games in his high school career. I know he was rated as a five-star center, the nation's number 2 center, but Clay Webb in high school football was a tackle and a guard. He's getting an apprenticeship and a learning experience, a college education, if you will, about playing center. I don't think Clay Webb is an option there at center, but you better believe this might be a game where Sam Pittman goes into his room and he says, I got to figure out who my 5 or 6 are that I'm going to win these big games with.
How about this? Miriam Mark Corbin says she's not even sure she's going to show up for DawgNation Deli on Monday. Y'all can't abandon me now, Miriam. Come on now. We got to be through this together, because here's the thing. I even hearing some people say this about, BA, you got to put Eddie up. You got to stop with all this Gator hater stuff. Obviously, this is not a day to be cocky and arrogant and talk about how bad Georgia's going to beat people, but also Georgia's not going to shy away from competition either. I mean, if you think I'm going to go into Jacksonville any less eager for Georgia to get back up off the deck, play well in that game, the same thing for Kentucky there as well. I mean, listen, there are a lot of Kentucky folks that talked a lot of stuff during the offseason as well. So, I know this sounds kind of corny to say, but, as someone who cares about this team, I'm ready to kind of compete more against Kentucky, not going to back down from Florida or Auburn, anything like that. I'm not quite as optimistic about how some of those games work out, But if you think I'm going to, run and hide and, not take what might come to me in the event that Georgia loses one of these games, I'm not going anywhere. People know where to find me.
I mean, does anything like you look for the market correction on this, fellas? I mean, does Georgia come out and just, torch Kentucky, 4 touchdowns passing, 3 touchdowns rushing, 300, 200 yards? Is that what it takes to remove this sting?
Oh, this one ain't going nowhere. This is like a wine stain on your carpet. This thing ain't going. Yeah, this is like a wine stain on your carpet. This thing ain't going anywhere anytime soon. You beat Kentucky under nothing. I'll be happy about it. But all that means is we're just 1 week removed from Georgia laying the absolute Easter egg of all time in the middle of Sanford Stadium.
What is the Kentucky? I know you know these things like the back of your hand, Brandon. What does the Kentucky line look like to you? Is Georgia 14 points better than Kentucky?
Oh, they're still a 14-point favorite in the game, at least. Yeah. They're still a big favorite, but
they score 21 points.
Yeah, as of right now, you're left to kind of wonder.
Am I allowed?
I'm not even sure what you're supposed to say. I'm just putting the microphone in your face.
Am I allowed to be positive here?
Sure. What way do you want to? Find the positive.
Georgia defense again was outstanding in the second half today. Jake Fromm, he's had poor games before and he's bounced back great. You look last year against LSU, he stunk like he stunk today. Came back against Florida, had a great game. I think Georgia can still do what it wants to do this season, but it has to get better. And I think it knows now it has to get better. It can't simply rely on its talent or its perceived talent. And I think, Georgia and this team, they've done it before. Last year against LSU, we sat at Tiger Stadium and wondered, what's going to happen with this team? How can they compete with it and go against an Alabama of the world if they even get to that point? They ran the table last year, got to that point, and competed with Alabama. Why can't they do that again?
So, let me just respond to this and let you give you a chance to respond to it as well. I agree with you on half of what you said, and I don't agree with you on at least part of what you said. The part about the defense is 100% true. Georgia's defense right now, even though they're not quite getting there on the pass rush, they are playing well enough and stingy enough to give Georgia a chance to win any game, even some of these better teams that some people suddenly think Georgia's going to lose to, and I understand why you feel that way. The defense gives you a chance to win those games. I agree with you on that. The one thing, though, that I can't do that you seem to want to do, you've done this now twice, is compare this to at LSU. I mean, Les Miles used to say it. Death Valley is the place where dreams go to die. We saw Auburn, for instance, in 2013. They played for a national championship. They won the SEC. They got beaten up pretty good in Baton Rouge. I don't think you have anything to apologize for if you lose at Baton Rouge. Losing in your own stadium to 2-3 South Carolina is, to me, not in the same universe as having lost LSU, and I'll let you respond.
I would just, again, I'd bring up Oklahoma lost at home to Iowa State. Clemson lost at home to Pitt.
That's a little bit of a story.
These losses happen, and, I think Georgia can – I still believe Georgia can turn it around. It just has to figure itself out. It has to find out – and I can't believe I'm actually saying this. It has to find out who its best players are, and you shouldn't be doing that during week 7.
I agree with that point that he makes there at the end.
So the correction, the market correction, is for Georgia to come off the mat against LSU. Here's what they did: they found out who their weapons were. They fed the ball to Jeremiah Holloman. Who does Georgia find now to become their difference maker in these games? Jeremiah Holloman's not here. Is it trying to give a crash course and a overdose of George Pickens now? Is that the answer in the passing game? Is it more Lawrence Cager? To me, the question on my mind, Brandon, and I know it's what everybody's that's still on this feed want to know. Do you think Georgia still has a better team than the Florida Gators right now?
Oh, I don't know. Am I going to run and hide from Florida? I'm not. Do I have a lot less confidence in what to expect from Georgia week to week? I do, because here's something else that was true to go back to the LSU comparison from last year. I still went into Jacksonville pretty confident last year that Georgia would win that game. At least I think I was. I'm a little bit less confident today because of the nature of how bad this loss is. But Georgia's not going to run from Florida. Georgia's going to tape up, buckle up, and be ready to go, and I'll be glad to see it. It's just one of those things where you at least have to open up your door to the idea that the basement for Georgia is a lot lower than we initially thought it was.
I think, I guess this is the way everyone's feeling in the wake of this loss. I don't think this is a loss that becomes a positive for Georgia. I don't think it's a loss that they rally around and it was stories will be written that they needed that in order to find their game and what they're all about and their identity. I think this is a loss that shows what Georgia is and what it is not. And what it is not is a national championship type team.
I'm not ready to say that. I mean, based on where you are at 6 games, they're obviously not a national championship team. I'm not ready to close the door on a national championship for this year, but it's going to have to be magnitudes better. I mean, magnitudes better. But as we've said, there are examples you can cite where teams have played pretty poorly and still won the title. So the season for me is not over. I think every goal is still out there. I'm just not sure of Georgia's ability to reach those goals.
You know, the thing that I'm sitting there processing a lot of things everybody are saying, and we're hitting the right notes here, but I want to just come to this, because the easy thing to say, if you know football, is, it was just 4 turnovers. I think if the turnover margin was +2 or Georgia didn't take away 2 less turnovers except for the pick 6, I still think this is a 1-score, 2-score game the way Georgia played, if it played a clean game, or if South Carolina gave Georgia the ball in a turnover or 2. That's how dysfunctional this performance felt like to me.
So let me ask both of you this. Connor, you're in Athens a lot. Jeff, you've known a lot of these guys as recruits dating back when they're in the 8th grade or whatever. Who do you trust to, in a private moment, I always use this as an example. I don't know if this really happens. Turn over a table, throw a chair, punch a wall. Who gets this team's attention? And anytime a team's ever turned itself around after a bad loss, the vision I have in my head is there's always like some great meeting where somebody says what needs to be said. Connor, based on what you see in Athens each week, who's the guy to do that?
I think Jared Reed's the guy to do that. I think Eric Stokes is a guy that can do that. I think Jordan Davis and Tyler Clark are guys that can do that.
All defensively, by the way. Wow.
That's my point. Now, maybe DeAndre Swift can do this. I wouldn't surprise me if he is, but I don't think Jake Fromm is doing this. I don't think you want your quarterback doing this. I don't think any wide receiver is. I don't think Andrew Thomas or Ben Cleveland are. Maybe Isaiah Wilson is, but the leaders on this team are on defense, and it showed today.
Maybe Cade Mays, is the guy that can do that, but you talk about turnover tables. Well, Kirby Smart's not the guy that can do this. He can't make these boys. You don't want him to make these boys. He could give the greatest Kirby Smart speech of all time Sunday afternoon or Monday morning before they go out to practice. It's got to be the guys looking themselves in the mirror and say, folks, I saw that film, and that's not our football team, and that's not going to be Georgia's football team. But, I'm going to say, can I say damning on your air, Brandon? This is a family show, but when we just roll off the guys that are going to change things, that are going to be not in this house, you can't find someone offensively to be that guy. And I'm going to say that one of the things I saw today, Brandon, I don't know if you saw it down on the sideline, but it used to be that the get-back coach, Scott Sinclair, had to grab Kirby Smart's belt buckle and bring him in. And late in that 4th quarter, especially in overtime, there were 4 get-back coaches on 4 Georgia assistant coaches. There was a guy pulling Charlton Warren back on the field. There was a guy pulling Kirby Smart back on the field. There was a guy pulling Dan Lanning back on the field. To me, that is not the picture you want when a team that still hangs its hat on defense and the defense still plays well, that the coaches are that code red about trying to fix things that they see where South Carolina has them out of formation, out of alignment. Let's say this very clearly. I want you to name me a game for this coaching staff this year where they came out and it felt like they were out scheming the opponent at the jump.
Oh, I
haven't felt that way once.
Yeah, I don't.
They were up 21-0 on Vanderbilt midway through the 2nd quarter.
Do you really think that was I don't want to pit Knicks, but do you think that's?
They were up 21-0.
But it's not Cole Kmet, running free, where pretty clearly Notre Dame found something they could exploit. I thought that South Carolina found some things they could exploit here today. It's one thing to be overwhelming an opponent; it's another thing to be scheming past them. And I agree with you, Jeff. I don't know that we've seen that this year.
There wasn't plays where that's a good point to bring up Vanderbilt and the ease of how they built that lead. But to me, it didn't seem like it was scheme and plays that were building that lead. It seemed like it was players that were building that lead.
To me, it did.
And I think that's what Georgia has right now. Is it's like, oh, you're a great player. Go make great plays.
Yeah. So I know we're late, and we're going to get off the air here in a minute, but some people are also kind of joining us late. They're just kind of getting with us. So some questions are coming in. Ken Feinberg, for instance, asked about this. Let's reset some of the more, I guess, fact-based things here. The Harrion thing keeps coming up. Harrion was reported to have that Georgia reported this, had a sprained back, and that's why he didn't play. You have Schaefer dealing with a sprained neck. You have, obviously, Campbell not playing at all. Turf toe still for Campbell. Walker's got the cast. We showed you that during the dog walk here today. Webb leaves the game.
Hurt his knee. Collided his knee, bumped knee with Ryan Helinski's knee brace.
Who am I leaving out, Jeff?
Lawrence Cager.
Cager has a separated. Cager's had a separated shoulder, and it sounds just like that's going in and out when he gets hit. And unfortunately, you saw that I think at the end of the Tennessee game, and you saw it today where he took a hit, and I don't believe he came back into the game after that today. Kinley had an ankle injury. He was getting that iced up the entire second half when I was down there watching him. So, to say banged up football team right now.
Tony Jackson says give Muschamp some props. I think you got to. I thought Muschamp coached a pretty good game today, all things being equal. And you kind of wonder, individual injuries I always say are overrated. You wonder if the point spread dropping, though, the way that it did was kind of a reflection of the collective injuries being a little bit of a factor for Georgia maybe there. I guess we're going to get off the air here. Let me thank a couple people, though. UGA Bookstore, always gracious host to us. Y'all check it out. They have autograph signings for every game. They have really cool Georgia apparel, the Tommy Bahama, the Peter Millar, the 47 brand, the Nike stuff. UGA Bookstore just does it right when it comes to UGA apparel. Also, our friends at Pella Window and Door. I can promise you, no one's sadder than all the guys and gals over at Pella. They love UGA. They're proud to support DawgNation. They're proud to be a part of this UGA talk, and they wish we were having a happier subject today. You can find them online at pellasoutheast.us or call them at 404-445-2979. The number, once again, 404-445-2979. That'll get you in touch with Pella Window and Door of Georgia. You got a final thought before we go?
Final thought, everybody remember the turnover battle, but the one thing I think that we said a lot, discovered a lot, talked out a lot, Georgia has 95 plays in this game for 468 yards, which gives you an example. That's less than 5 yards per play.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Connor, how about yourself?
Georgia's got to play better. It's that simple. You can riddle off stats, you can say whatever you want, but the reality is Georgia has to play better than it did today.
For a final thought from me, I'll address all of you and say, y'all know there's no conversation. I'd rather have less than the one that we just had, but I take it as a tremendous privilege that you would allow us to narrate this experience for all of you. The disappointment of a loss for Georgia for the first time in quite some time between the hedges of Sanford Stadium. The first loss suffered since the field was renamed Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. So these are not happy times. At some point, the times will be better, and we'll be just as happy to cover that for you then here on DawgNation as we are here now. Monday, we'll come back here for DawgNation Daily. We'll try to figure this out all over again, and we appreciate you giving us a chance to do that with you as well. Thanks for being here on the Pella Window Postgame Show. Go find a friend, go find a loved one, find something to do. Hug your kids to take your mind off of all of this. There will be better days than this, but this is not a good one. Thanks for being a part of our Pella Window Postgame Show. We'll see you next time here live from the UGA Bookstore.